Alrighty, we got a new battle report with a new camera and new microphone, and I think everything's turning out just fine around this time, so we'll see how my Chris Davies Vlad 2 list pairs off against Ethan's Issyria 2 list. And we both have Colossals, and I just have more infantry and he's got more battle cry, so we'll see how this goes. So Ethan ended up winning the roll and chose to go first. You can see he's doing a pretty basic move with a Colossal, especially on a scenario like Recon, and putting it towards the middle, maybe a little bit offshoot to the side. I'm kind of following suit here, putting my Colossal almost directly across from his. I can't put him by the end or by the upper side of my deployment zone just because those boxes are there and I wouldn't be able to get him over those. I don't mind being near the hill, but I want to be able to try and have a channel between that wall on Ethan's side, more towards Ethan's side of the table, and my objective if it hangs around for a while. The Winter Guard are sticking more towards the trench, and this way, if they do start, if considerable damage starts happening on that side, then they can kind of push up towards the hill and maybe even the wall. But I don't expect in this game the Winter Guard to get buried that deeply. Now the Man of War I've chose to put on the upper portion of the table. In hindsight, I think it probably would have been better to switch the Winter Guard and Man of War. Even though I have Saxon Warwick in the list and he can help them get through the forest, it doesn't really aren't very effective when they have a forest blocking most of their lanes. But this list, even though it's has few models in it, still has a pretty large footprint with, you know, the 7 medium bases you get from the Man of War, then the 120 Colossal, and a few other things, mechanics and chaos eliminators, things like that. So Joe and the eliminators are on the bottom hand or the bottom side, and then I put another unit of eliminators at the top side. It just, in my experience, it seems like it's been decent to kind of split them along the table so they can try and converge in the middle. Turn 1 is pretty straightforward. Everybody gets their focus out at the last minute because we were prepared for everything else but getting focus out, it seems. So Ethan apparates his Chimera, which is a pretty scary little jack for me right now, just because with blinding light and me having so much or me leaning so much on infantry to do work before the Colossal can get unpacked, that spell really messes with me. And now he can also get it out on both units pretty easily. The Chimera it's not a very survivable jack in my opinion, but it does have, blinding light has a 10-inch range. Issyria's got like a 16-inch or 16-inch command area or control area, so she can really reach out and touch someone, and that wall really puts him in having the wall and first turn puts him in the place to be, or puts him in a spot to be able to make sure that blinding light happens right away and starts hurting me horribly bad. It also gives him the ability to run his Colossal up and not really fear a whole lot of retaliation from my army. Plus, you know, Inviolable Resolve on a Hyperion is serious business too. We were trying to figure out the math on Colossals, and it looked like the Hyperion has about 64 boxes, which is tied with the Conquest, so he is just about as survivable. It's just that I think 12 maybe of those boxes are in a force field, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. But you can see that Ethan's pretty aggressive here on turn 1. He's playing a control list, and he knows that if he starts controlling my army early, that he will be able to make sure that it doesn't do anything. Like blinding light twice in a row on a shooting unit is really not favorable for me. I have some some ways to make the Winter Guard a little bit more effective in close combat, you know, between Hand of Fate and Strength of the Bear. So there I was trying to measure out, like, what's Blinding Light range look like on that Chimera. And it's pretty gross, because basically at this point, the Chimera could really just reach out from anywhere and get Blinding Light on me, just because of being able to apparate and run, and then Issyria having a pretty considerable control area to where she can keep him in and be able to remain relatively safe. So I figured the best place for me to be was just to bunker up in this trench here. I know that puts me under some threat from the Hyperion, but at this point I feel like if I can get the Hyperion to come closer to launch the big crit consume cannon at them, then I'm probably in a decent spot here. So right now, the House Vire Electromancers are really, really scary. So I end up putting some early game rocket deviations into them, and that one looked like it hit the Chimera. It didn't really do any damage. I think maybe 2 boxes or something like that. But I'm really just trying to go for some damage on the Electromancers. That 3-man unit has the potential to take out up to 9 models, really, and it's they're not a unit that I want to see on the table. So here I end up walking the Conquest up and using him more as a platform to try and make that happen. So I go for, I think I have 5 deviations that I can throw on them, and I think the 12-inch ones I decide to skip just because they the chances of them getting somewhere far are pretty slim. I probably should have just went with it. Well, maybe I do go with it. The 15-inch one didn't do anything, so the big gun. So now it does look like I'm throwing little templates out just to see if I get lucky on these scatters, because the like I said, those Electromancers really don't care too much about a unit of Winter Guard when they can. I mean, like, I can always put shots into them and take them off pretty easily because they are just like the lower end of Ret infantry. But the 2 Electromancers could easily take out half the unit of Winter Guard, and I'm just not feeling that right now. So, however, I think if the Electromancers come out, then the Conquest can probably pull them off. So they'd probably get 1 good shot and then die, but that's all they'd really need, because the less Winter Guard that are there, the better it is. So I believe the shock troopers ended up doing a shield wall move, but they had moved in a way where they're in 2-man pods, so that way I can't, if the Hyperion is close enough to throw some shots into them, or Discordia gets on them, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for those Ret ranged attacks to put meaningful damage into the shock troopers. This way I kind of do some damage mitigation, I guess. Because typically with the unit of 6 now, you see them in pods of 3, but this one I've spread them out into pods of 2 just because they're survivable enough to where I think they can tank a few shots here and there. My eliminators on the bottom side of the screen run up to the cover, and the eliminators that were on the top of the screen kind of ran into the middle. Now, I can't quite tell what I can't remember what I was measuring there, but it's back to Ethan now. This is where the Electromancers are trying to figure out how they're going to get work done, and there's a lot of interesting measuring that goes on here, utilizing some, I guess I'll save it for when it comes around, but there is a pretty interesting way to look at the way that the light E-leaps kind of get set up. So, and this is, unfortunately enough, the game of War Machine has gotten a little a little less action-packed in the early parts of the turn, just because you're sitting here and every single move that matters. I mean, and of course every move matters right now, especially since battle groups are so large and you're having a lot of points and activations, and you want to make sure you get the most out of them. But these the early parts of the turns are always templates hitting the table, seeing where certain things can go, and with that Discordia spray that was being lined up over there on the top side of the screen, due to the placement of the shock troopers, there was only one that Discordia could get, so there wasn't a whole lot of action coming out of that. And we have a Chimera apparating, and then the proxy base on the hill to figure out where he's going to end up to destroy my Winter Guard, essentially. But here this is where Ethan's trying to figure out if the Electromancers can get into a decent spot to either take stealth or be within the 5 inches to get stealth off the or to bypass the stealth on the Eliminators. And then there was a measurement there to see if the Eliminators were within 4 inches of the flag, to see if they if the Electromancer could put one of their own Electromancers near the flag, so that essentially what you're doing is Electromancer shoots the one that's closest to the flag, then that bounces off the Electromancer into the flag and then into the Eliminators, which is pretty righteous use of scenario pieces. Since objectives and flags are considered models, they can still have things like that happen to them. So this is just execution of getting the Chimera where he needs to be to get blinding light off. And it looks like, based on the placement, the Chimera is going for not just the Winter Guard, but also going for the Man-O-War as well. And the only thing the Man-O-War really lose out on is their little shield attack. So, I mean, they're POW 14s at Rat 5 and the officers at Rat 6, so they're not inconsequential. So now we've got a Hyperion lining up to be within 12 inches of the Man-O-War to see what they just to try and put some shots into some of them. The guns don't roll really high for their ability to or for the number of shots they get. I think it was 1 for one side and 2 for the other, and one of them had missed. And since they're in shield wall, the damage that was done to them wasn't very high. Now we've got Discordia moving up to spray and get in his position to see if he can rip one of them off the table. And there's some moderate damage. I think it's like 2 or 4 damage that go on to that Man-O-War. Not something that's extremely intense. And then the Discordia does I can't remember the name of the abilities that Alara has, but it's essentially like a refuge type shot. I think it's like Swiftness of Death or something. I can't remember. I play against Retribution pretty frequently. We have 3 Retribution players out of our like 20-person meta in Baraboo, and then when you expand that out to Madison, we've got quite a few more there too. But without having more room in front of me, it's hard to remember some of these corner case models, because I think Alara 1 is just somebody who I don't see very often, so she feels a little more. But when I do see her, it's with a stupid Discordia, and I absolutely hate Discordia as a Khador player, since most of my troop mitigation comes from blast damage, and I'm always bringing some type of blast damage. But now we've got this time blinding light went out on the Colossal and the Winter Guard, so any shooting that I can do this turn is kind of taken away from me, or my opportunities to shoot are taken away from me. Blinding Light is definitely a spell in this game that's going to hurt me quite a bit. Most of my army relies on ranged capabilities, and the threat extenders that I have here are not vast. I mean, I just have a sail on Vlad 2 for the conquest, so the conquest in this game is threatening 11 inches max all the time, and the Hyperion is threatening just one more at 12. So it's I have to play the game a little bit more interestingly to make sure that my conquest doesn't get trivially taken off the table with no repercussion. So here this turn is a big tank turn for me. So and I'm ruining game states by flipping flags over, but we try our best. I think that's another thing about War Machine that's interesting right now with Mark III is that with pre-measuring, there's a lot more opportunities are created to disturb models and disturb the game state. So I've tried to be as careful as I can, but when you're leaning over a table to try and make sure that certain ranges are perfect, it's a little more difficult. And I have the very handy Muse set that lets me try and measure some of these longer distances, but sometimes it's just easier to put the tape measure down. So there I ran a Winter Guard to try and hold up try and proc admonition that was put on the Chimera, and then Ethan had moved him 6 inches back thinking it was a full advance. I think it was just him getting confused with Refuge and admonition, just kind of putting the two spells together. But at any rate, he moves back his 3 inches, and my sacrificial Winter Guard, that the only thing in that unit that activated really. I mean, they all activated, but he's the only one who actually did anything. The big thing is I wanted to make sure that whatever I decide to put into the Chimera doesn't have to worry about the admonition bouncing or triggering and then bouncing off, so they can't get their charge. So this is the templates I've laid out are measuring the Hyperion's max melee threat. So the Conquest isn't going to be able to go very far and get to a place where he can really contribute to the table. I mean, he can't contribute right now anyways just because of the blinding light being on him, but there's nothing interesting he can do. And I know, like, during my rambling I had missed what some people might think is a weird play, but the Electromancers, after they realized they couldn't get any dirty tricks to pull off the eliminators on the bottom side of the screen sitting in that rubble, they decided to move back with just staying out of 20.5 inches because there's some chance, or not a chance really, but there's something to be said about feeding on eliminators just to get them jammed if you don't need anybody else for like melee output. So they tried to stay away so they weren't hindered all game, because they don't hit defense 17 very well, even with Issyria's feed. So here I'm just like I'm so deep in the tank I'm drowning at this point here, where I figured out where the Conquest wants to go, and now I'm just trying to figure out. I know that this is going to be a feat turn for Vlad, like that's just going to happen. And I know that my main goal is to use the Mana War to take out the Chimera. Like a two Mana War should take out the Chimera, like with the feat and Hand of Fate, which they got on them first turn. So now I'm trying to figure out where the other Mana War are going to go, because they can put they can charge into a Hyperion, which, like, at POW plus strength 17, their dice off 5 after Inviolable Resolve, with, you know, 4 dice drop the lowest, and that's not bad. But there are two Arcanist mechanics sitting behind him, and that is that kind of changes, that kind of sways my thoughts a little bit, because I would be chipping damage into the Hyperion. It's not like I wouldn't be at a great advantage to shred a huge amount of boxes off of him, especially since there's that force field, but there is nothing in the list that can repair the force field, so getting that out of the way just makes me feel a little less tilty when I go into them. I don't know why, but for some reason, whenever I go into a ret check and I'm putting damage into a force field, I feel like I'm not really doing any damage to it, even though I know that those are boxes that are coming off of him. The force field is just a cute mechanic, really. But, so the other thing is Discordia is right next to the objective, where that blue token is, just behind the forest. So now I'm trying to figure out how many Man-O-War can I get onto the models that I'd like to. So I 100% want to get 2 into the Chimera. And the next thing I'm like, oh, should I take out the objective, or should I put chip damage into the Hyperion, or should I put damage into Discordia? I think that it's just I had a flop here with kind of target prioritization, because the Hyperion, if I put a little bit of damage into it, it's not a big deal. And if I feed it models, it just means that it gets to stay back and punch those models and take them away, and then stay happy and comfortable where it is outside of the Conquest threat range. So the other thing is Discordia is such a pain in the butt, and I maybe have a little bit I have a little bit more against him than most people, since he's shut down a lot of my Khador lists in the past. So I think and this is, I'm thinking I'm gonna at least get 4. So I know that the 2 Man-O-War that are just behind the Conquest are going into the Chimera, and the like I said, this is I feel like I'm dying out here, but I was in the tank for a super long time. This is very much not advisable. Like, this should have been a lot more of a quick decision than what it really was. I think in hindsight, what I should have done was I want to talk about what I did and what I should do, because because I'm just trying to fill up some time until I actually do it. But this is I should wait and see how this all unfolds, and then go from there. But this is me trying to figure out where I need to place the other Man-O-War, and one of the things that come up while I'm trying to do this and assign these guys to their appropriate spots is that I need to make sure that the Man-O-War do not charge the targets that they want to charge and end up in melee range of the Hyperion. Because like I had said earlier, if I'm putting Man-O-War into the Hyperion and giving him models to take off without even having to move, then that's a benefit for the Hyperion, because he's still able to stay out of the Conquest's melee range. And then for some reason I decide to say, okay, well, now I'm going to put down I'm going to see where I can put down wind blast templates, because then if the Hyperion needs to move forward, then he won't be able to shoot either. And I don't know, I just I really screwed myself here. Like, this is not a showcase of my ability to plan a turn or anything like that. It's pretty terrible. So I just was trying to see where because Wind Blast is a really good spell. It really is, especially when you have an opponent's Colossal sitting there. So now I'm actually getting off the shitter, so to speak, and putting some Man-O-War into the Chimera, and I'm making very certain that I'm staying outside of the Hyperion's melee range, because I need to make sure that I can try to get the Hyperion to move up to take the Man-O-War out and get closer to the Conquest, instead of me having to try and bait or bubble wrap my Conquest with things that the Hyperion can't really get around. And Man-O-War do that all right, especially in a list like Ethan's, where there's so few models to try and clean things up. And I do apologize for the shaking of the screen. Currently, I don't have a tripod to put the camera on, so there's like this massive like ghetto stack of all my unused battle foam right now, just kind of stacked on top of plastic containers, and then a couple books on top of that holding up the camera. So the camera is actually on the table that we're playing on, so every time I or Ethan lean on it, it just kind of tilts the screen a little bit. So once again, apologize, but this is a process of development, so it's not really I'm just trying to get the things together that I need to make this a little bit better. So you can see I've got 2 Man-O-War on the Chimera. 2 Man-O-War have walked up or ran up to kind of stay in the back to get ready for a counterattack, so to speak, or if when they survive, you know, they've got or once these other ones die in the front, they've got, you know, some meaningful, or there's something surviving there, you know. And then the other 2, I ended up putting 1 into the objective and 1 into Discordia, and Ethan has taken Stockpile as his objective, the one that lets him take shots from the objective onto a model that's nearby. So it was fairly quick. I figured that, or I learned that because my assault shot, which I may or may not have been able to take because of blinding light. I kind of forgot about that. But the objective gets sacked off to the Hyperion and doesn't do any damage at all. So the Man-O-War at the bottom starts swinging on the Chimera after all of my assault shots, which I probably shouldn't have been able to take. Oh wait, no, never mind. The Man-O-War weren't blinding lighted, it was the Conquest that was blinding lighted, so they could take their assault shots just fine. So after 2 assault shots and 1 melee attack, the Chimera goes down. So I've got 1 unspent melee attack here, and I'll come back to that after this activation is all said and done with. So the Chimera's gone, and I'm happy about that because it means that Issyria has to get a little bit more ballsy with blinding light. And I put some damage into Discordia, put a little bit of damage into the objective. I think I left it on 4 or something like that. Now, that lonely Winter Guard that ran up to proc admonition is sitting there next to my Man-O-War. What I should have done with my unused melee attack is put that into that Winter Guard to try and kill it. Right now all he is a beacon for an easy blinding light now that the Chimera is gone. It's almost like I gave him an arc node back to fuck over the Winter Guard one more turn. So Discordia took some pretty decent damage. Most of it was to the shield. Nothing to shave off any systems or anything, but the Man-O-War with a charge and Hand of Fate and the assault damage can really get a lot of work done. Now I think, other than the Winter Guard problem, I could have put the other 2 Man-O-War a little bit more in the center of the table to try and just pull them up a little bit more forward. Maybe make a castle for them around, or just make a line so that if the Hyperion needed to come through, those would be in the way. And if I would have done that, I would have been able to move the Conquest up a little bit more forward so that Ethan would be pressed to not only deal with the Winter or the Man-O-War that are sitting there, but he'd also have my Conquest in charge range of his Hyperion, so he would be forced to back it up or see how a dice plus 1 Conquest goes into the Hyperion. Now this is another turn where some tanking happens. It's a pretty pivotal point where Ethan's got, I don't even know if it's a pivotal point in the game, because like I feel like my Man-O-War charges were a little bit misappropriated, or appropriated, yeah. They were not done in the correct fashion. What I should have done was put both those Man-O-War into the Discordia and just try and put a ton of damage into it and try and make it so that the mechanics couldn't like empower if they wanted Discordia to do things. Like they'd have to repair him to make him a little bit better. So Instead, I just kind of spread some damage out, and it wasn't very effectual other than killing the Chimera, which doesn't matter because that Winter Guard is sitting there as a pseudo arc node for them. I also don't. I knew that the Electromancers were planning to bounce off the flag to get the Eliminators in the first place, but I kind of forgot about that after spending forever trying to figure out how to execute my feat. So I didn't check to see if the Eliminators were within 4 inches of the flag or not, so they could be at a little bit of risk here, depending on what happens. So I don't know what the measurements were for right there. I know it was 12 inches, but it was probably something like the Hyperion gun or something, just to see what could happen there. Lots of thinking and pre-planning, trying to figure out what to do, because like this is where the game's getting to the point where things are crashing in the middle, and mistakes, a very small mistake, could end up costing you quite a bit. So, and this with Recon, having 2 Colossals, or having a Colossal on each side, makes it so that Recon's a little bit more difficult of a scenario to score. You can run to a flag with your caster and try and take some points that way, just to try and stay away from the Colossal, because usually you can dance around it a little bit. But there's also a few heavy rifle teams back behind. They're right next to the house. That is, they're in between the house and the Hyperion. So I couldn't really put Vlad in the corner there to go to the flag by the water, or by the clock, and try and get points there. And I don't think Ethan could really go there and be comfortable, just because the Manowar Covenant is pretty close by, and the Eliminators also can reach out pretty far over there and put some hurt into just about anything that goes over there, as far as, I guess, not a jack, but even then, like under feet with combo strike, they go up to like, what, POW 14 or something like that. It's not bad. It's not great. It's not a great use of their potential. Usually the Chaosi Eliminators, if they can do work, then it's awesome, and if they don't do work, then they usually are just jamming, which is primarily what I do. So we got some table movement happening. Issyria did feat this turn, so they can see through stealth, and they get their mini signs importance. So it looks like Discordia had activated and took off 1 Manowar, and with them at armor 20, it's not so trivial to get rid of them. So this other Manowar that's just kind of hanging out, he's outside of reach of the Hyperion. Discordia didn't really get into him at all, but these heavy rifle teams are trying to pull him off, and they don't roll the greatest, even with feet and armor piercing. So they end up leaving him on just a couple boxes. So that does hurt a little bit, just because Ethan has so few attacks to put out. He has a lot of quality attacks, just not a big quantity of them. So it does mess with his plan, since he just can't. And he also, since his Warcaster can't commit to it for damage either, that kind of puts a damper on things. That Hyperion's got its work cut out for it. So the templates that went down earlier measured 11 inches to make sure that the Hyperion could get to a point where it's outside of the Conquest charge. Once again, it's just kind of a game of chicken between these 2 Colossals, and unfortunately we both are pretty hefty, so we don't have the luxury of being able to just kind of tank a charge from the other one. So this is where, if I would have put the other Manowar kind of in a spot where they were in the middle, I think that the Conquest could have moved up a little bit further and become more of a threat to the Hyperion, or being able to get the alpha on the Hyperion. I think that probably would have been a better choice. I think that in this matchup in general, Issyria's she's favored in the matchup, just because Blinding Light, really jerks over the Winter Guard, and the Conquest doesn't get to commit in the early game like it wants to if he's shooting. I also probably should have just ran turn 1 instead of putting shots into Electromancers. That's another hindsight thing for you too. Like when a Colossal moves up on turn 1 or just advances on turn 1 and ends up putting out attacks for lucky drifts like your Judicators, your Conquests, and Hyperions, things like that. Anything that's got a big AoE, Mammoth even maybe. Yeah, I think they have AoEs. But anything like that, it seems like they end up committing to the game later, so you're always playing on the back foot. So if the Conquest would have ran forward, he would have done exactly what he did to the Electromancers at the beginning of the game, which is nothing, and he would have just been in a little bit better of a position to make sure that the Hyperion had to play a little bit more honest, I think. But at any rate, their template went down earlier to see if that Man-O-War was within 4 inches of either the Hyperion or the flag, so the Electromancers could do their sneaky shit again, but that wasn't the case. So I think an Eliminator might have come off in the middle there. I'm not sure exactly what was put in the middle of the table. I can say that I do like the quality of the video camera. I just think that maybe it might be the angle that I'm playing at, but it seems like it's harder to make out specific models, and maybe it just could be the paint job on some of them too. Like those Eliminators are pretty drab looking. So the UA goes down, and I had a feeling that was going to happen. The Hyperion just moved up and kind of punched it. So the Hyperion's just taking some shots. Just trying to, oh no, the Hyperion's not taking any shots. I'm just going crazy. I honestly don't know exactly what happened here. Maybe the Hyperion shot the Man-O-War off the table. Right now, I did pick up a higher quality microphone so that I can make sure that I get some good sound and not have any problems that I would have had with the headset that I was using before. However, it is only one microphone that I have right now. I'm still on the I think what I'm going to do next time is I'm going to try and get 2 people to use the one microphone, because it's kind of an overhanging microphone. I did go with a condenser microphone, I think is what they're called, instead of a dynamic one, because I didn't want to be picking up noise from my computer or whatever else happened around me. So the condenser microphone's a little bit more focused, has a little bit cleaner sound. However, I don't know how that's going to work having 2 people here, but I'm willing to give it a shot, and then this way my opponent's turns can be a little bit more well presented, since I'm not able to get into their head and figure out what they need to do or where the mistakes were made, because when I do lose a game, it always looks like my opponent's decisions were always exactly the perfect ones at the right time. And with Ethan, he's a very tight player. He's very cognizant to the measurements on the table and making sure that he understands the threat ranges and knows exactly what your kind of plan is with things. So when you do play against him, it's always a trying matchup. It's never something where you're just gonna be like, "Ah, Ethan, you did this stupid thing." I mean, he has his days, but for the most part, Ethan's turns are very well thought out and well executed. So now here I am dinking around with these stupid templates again, and the more at this point in the game, it's not really that big of a deal, because if Vlad gets up close enough to put one of those down, I realize shortly into this plan that he's probably in range to also get charged. So this is me doing more stupid things, putting down more 5-inch AoEs to see if if I can try and keep the Hyperion from shooting. So we pull the Hyperion off, place a base down, try to see if where Vlad can put that thing to make sure that the Hyperion stays out. And I don't even think that this is me like trying to figure it out. I think this is me actually doing it. At any rate, I was trying to be cute with Vlad, but if 2 focus can shut down the shooting from a 37 or 30, between 37 and 39 point model, I think I'm okay with it for the most part. But my clock is getting really, really, really slim here. I am at the, I probably that second turn was definitely a bad one for me. It really, really hurt me. And I usually pride myself as being able to play quickly, or play games quickly, but it's been quite some time since I've played against Issyria, and with Blinding Light, she's just such a boogeyman for this list, or even my list pairings in general, because Khador just, up until the errata at least, relied heavily on, or not up until, but after the errata. In a post-errata Khador world, most of my lists are relying on a lot of it's not even the errata. Like, Karchev is still fine and dandy for me, just since I didn't really buy into the whole Mad Dog thing, although I do have 4 paperweights now that I was just using as point fillers before. But the most of my lists have infantry in them, since Khador's infantry is so good. So it's not him losing the Mad Dog spam isn't at my detriment at all. It just does, it kind of irks me a little bit, just because I feel like they were a little too heavy-handed here. So now you've got the Conquest putting in shots into the Electromancers to try and take some of them off the table now that he can get his big guns in there. So the the AoE 4 slides a huge way off. However, I think it ends up clipping Silas, and after rolling it out, I only do 2 damage to him, which would have been nice to be able to get him off the table, because it does hurt the efficacy of Blinding Light a little bit, not being able to get +2 range to it anymore, and getting Signs Importance on it, or Arcane Secrets, or whatever it is the ability is. Yeah, I think it's Arcane Secrets gives the boost, or the extra die. But I've got the Conquest within a very uncomfortable range of the Hyperion right now, and my intention is that it's turn 3, and my Winter Guard have been Blinding Lighted twice, so they've contributed very little to this game, other than just being able to initiate getting rid of the Chimera. So my goal is to put tough on them to make them harder to remove, and then run them to get in front of the Conquest. Now, if I were if I were in the right mind at this moment, which I'm kind of disappointed in myself at this point, where I realized that I spent way too long on that first turn, or on the first turn and the second turn. Now this is I was getting dangerously low on time, so I was also rushing a little bit, but I probably should have waited to move the Conquest and then ran the Winter Guard before the Conquest, and just kind of made a landing pocket for him, so that they could get up the table a little bit further, because you can kind of see it looks like there's a decent amount of guys bubble wrapping my Conquest on the front end, but it's really only 2 that are problematic, and they're all, like, if you look at where they could go, you could see that if the Hyperion were to charge the Conquest with his reach, he would still be able to make that charge. Like, I had an idea that was good in theory, but I didn't execute it very well, and I think at this point I have clocked myself. So what I had said is that, you know, we can just keep playing this out just to see kind of what happens. I really just wanted to see what the Hyperion Colossal or Hyperion Conquest fist fight would look like. So the game is essentially over, and Ethan walks away the victor on this one. But Now he wants to walk away with the conquest as well. That's a Kador pun, but on Tiss. Let it sink in. So I think he's just trying to play this right now as though my clock weren't killed, just to get a good amount of experience in the game, because Issyria is pretty good at clocking the opponent with the way that she controls the table. She also has the ability to get her army to put out a lot of damage to win the attrition game too. But I think, in my opinion, with Issyria, when she starts slipping on the attrition game, she really just like kind of shits the bed. If certain things come off the table, then she really falls behind, because she doesn't have the ability to like kind of get back into it like some other casters have the ability to do. So right now I think Ethan's just trying to pull off as many relevant models as he can. I think he ended up taking his own objective off the table because it was kind of clogging up the way the Hyperion needed to charge to get into the conquest. So now I think this is just Ilara, or whatever the hell is in the corner down there, trying to kill the Man-O-War that's kind of just sitting there chilling out. I don't know. I think I might have taken Discordia off the table at this moment, since there were a couple more like Man-O-War charges that went into him. I think I was just bitching about my turn taking too long, as opposed to actually recapping what was going on during my turn when I charged Discordia again. But it's whatever at this point. So now we've got the moment that I was basically holding out for, was the Hyperion getting into the conquest. There's no feat, but he has concentrated power on him, so he's swinging at POW 21 or something like that, 22, or maybe it is even 23. But the conquest is 64 boxes at armor 20, so it's at best dice +3. He burns through, I think right now he burns through the focus, or his full stack, and the conquest walks away with 7 boxes left. His left side is basically boxed, but his right side still has all the relevant systems left, so I do move up the one mechanic that is in range to get there, because at this point I just kind of want to hit the Hyperion back and have some kind of fulfillment out of my night. So I get the left side up and running again. The conquest has 3 focus on it. Vlad is going to activate shortly and put this is a Man-O-War Covenant trying to go crazy on Iris 2. He doesn't bring home the bacon. He needs an 8 to hit her and a 10 to hit her with his gun, so not a whole lot really comes out of him. So I think this is where Vlad goes and drops Hand of Fate onto the conquest. I'm pretty sure that's what goes on here. I think it was at this, maybe not at this point exactly, but there was a point here. Oh no, this is me. We discussed briefly about being able to shoot combined ranged attacks into a Colossal while it's engaged, and unbeknownst to me, I guess you can. So I ended up putting a 6-man CRA into the Hyperion along with 2 rockets, I think. Yeah, 2 rocket shots, just to see if I could chip some damage on the Hyperion to make it a little bit easier to take down. Because I think the Conquest, even though he's at dice +1, he might come up a bit short here. I really have to hope for some spikes, which Signs Importance really lets me do. Now, all the dice rolling, for me at least, happened off camera. I've got my dice box kind of set up in the on the table in the corner. What I'd like to do is, I do have a second webcam that's not really the greatest, but I would like to experiment recording the 2 videos at the same time, and then doing like a picture-in-picture of the dice being rolled into the dice box while the game is going on, so that people can actually see what the dice are, and so that I can also, and the person that I'm playing against can see their dice rolls and talk about, like, this was ridiculous, I blew this up, or screwed this roll. Like, I think it'd be beneficial. I lost, came up 7 boxes short, so we called her a night.